the master of the mock draft himself, Mel Kiper Jr., has released his 4.0 2025 NFL mock draft. And you know what it is. It's time to react and give you my thoughts on each pick in the first two rounds. Mel Kiper predicts the first two rounds of the 2025 NFL draft. The question is he right? Is he wrong? Gronk, spike the like button. Don't be a jabroni and subscribe. And of course, let me know in the comments your thoughts on Mel's new mock for 2025. Let's go, guys. It's time for another reaction. First pick. I think we know it's going to be Cam Ward to the Tennessee Titans. Everybody knows that's going to be the pick. Yeah, I think it's the right pick. You know, beyond the prediction, I think it's the right pick. The Tennessee Titans have not spent any money or resources on quarterback, and Cam Ward, to me, is the quarterback in this class that has the best chance of becoming a very good NFL starter with the combination of arm strength and power at the second level to make those intermediate passes, the composure and confidence to lead on and off the field, and the quick game ability. His release points and his arm angles are pretty underrated. At number 2, Travis Hunter to the Cleveland Browns, which is something that has not been too frequent. I've seen a lot of Abdul Carter number 2, and I think that's going to be one where people go back and forth. And I've been more on the Travis Hunter because it makes more sense for Cleveland. Because Cleveland can use Travis Hunter as a wide receiver and as a corner. And being that the Browns like to play a lot of man because they already have very good corners, and they need a receiver more than a defensive end, it would make a lot of sense, right? Hunter, I think, is being underrated as a receiver. You know, when you really look at his movement skills, his catch point ability, and then the future for him to pick up route running techniques, like he's going to be a special player once he really hones in on wide receiver. I think probably better than he maybe even will be at corner. But regardless, this guy's a special athlete, a special player, arguably the best overall football player in the draft. Not arguable. He is the best overall football player. The question is he the best prospect? It's number 1 or number 2 for a lot of people. So I think he makes more sense than Carter. But you guys let me know in the comments if you disagree. At number 3, Abdul Carter to the Giants. This would be pretty fun if you're a Giants fan. Like, the Giants have always won because of their pass rush. When you really think about it, like, they have never been the team that's won because they've had the best quarterback in football. Like, Phil Simms was very good. Don't get me wrong. Eli was very good. Don't get me wrong. But they were not Tom Brady or Peyton Manning or Joe Montana, right? They won because they had Lawrence Taylor. They won because they had Michael Strahan, Justin Tuck, UC Umanora, butchered his name, Umanora, and now they can go into a new generation where they have Dexter Lawrence, Abdul Carter, Brian Burns. I mean, Brian Burns could be their third best pass rusher on their team. Wow. Right? Kayvon Thibodeau, they could simply let walk after a season. But for now, it could be pretty damn special for 1 year. And that does maximize the Giants' opportunity to dominate on defense and to win this year, which is exactly what Brian Daboll is looking to do to keep his job. They brought in Russell Wilson and Jameis Winston. Both guys have incentive contracts where it's based on how much they play, right? So if they're gonna draft a quarterback, I don't think it's going to be at 3. I think it's likely to be second or third round as a developmental player because of the situation that the front office and the coach are in. And also, it's hard to pass up on Abdul Carter, a guy that has traits similar to Lawrence Taylor, really, truly. This guy is an every 3 to 5 year type of player at that position, in my opinion, in terms of bend, finesse, pass rushing capabilities, and traits. At number 4, Will Campbell to the Patriots seems likely at this point, and I would be fine with it as a Patriots fan. The problem is I don't know if a lot of people see T-Mac the way that I may or some others might. I don't think he's viewed as a top 10-ish type of receiver talent. I would love either way to go with a receiver or a tackle. I mean, preferably I'd like Travis Hunter because I think he would be a great Patriot. I'd love that player on our team with his versatility, which is a Patriots staple, and then also the electricity of his game as an athlete, I think, is special. So, and the jump ball ability with Drake May would be pretty fun, as on top of the yak that he provides too. But if he does not fall to 4, which it seems increasingly unlikely that that's going to happen, Will Campbell is a fine pick. I am a little concerned about his measurables, but he does have the strongest technique and tape. And as we kind of learned last year, I feel like in the draft last year, a lot of people were kind of just over-calculating the ability of these players based on measurables at offensive line. I think it's a little bit too much discussion there. I think technique is such a big deal that people often overlook, and the hand usage. And I think Will Campbell is definitely one of those guys. Plus, New England desperately needs a long-term left tackle. And this guy screams Vrabel guy, too. At number 5, Mason Graham continually seems to be the most mocked thing I've ever seen. Like, other than Cam Ward to the Titans, Mason Graham to Jacksonville is the most frequent pick. And honestly, I'm not sure Mason Graham is quite a top 5 type of player at defensive tackle. You know, he doesn't really scream at you in terms of his pass rushing productivity, and he doesn't have incredible traits. I mean, this is not Jalen Carter or Quinnen Williams, you know, in terms of prospect profile. And this is a very good and very deep defensive tackle class. So I do think this would be, he feels like a very high floor player that also needs to kind of grow a little bit more as a pass rusher. But he's got great, you know, combination of power and quickness. I feel like the quickness is the trait that really separates him for most people. And the disruption and the motor, that's what people like the most. But I will say that Mason Graham is not one of those guys that's in line with the recent top 5 picks at defensive tackle. But I will say, I think the NFL is recognizing defensive tackle is maybe a little bit more important than we gave it credit for. I've always thought defensive tackle, just because I always remember Tom Brady saying interior pressure is the most difficult. At number 6, Ashton Jeanty, which also feels to be pretty frequently mocked at this position. I will say that I wouldn't blame them. I just feel like the way that the Raiders need so many other spots on their team, including wide receiver 1, cornerback 1, and maybe 2, right? I think they could use a linebacker. I think they could use a defensive tackle. I mean, I just feel like there are so many other positions that are more valuable to an NFL team's success that I would prefer. That being said, I don't think there's any denying that Jeanty is a top 5 player in this class, so I can't really deny that he would have a significant impact. Plus, it's Las Vegas, remember, and it's a win-now team because of Pete Carroll and Geno Smith. So they want players that can produce right away and that can change this culture, change this team, and Jeanty could be that type of player from his explosion, from his off-the-field character, which is extremely strong. And it's in Vegas, like I said. So they need a marquee baller out there outside of Brock Bowers, a jersey seller, a guy that people want to go see when they're in Vegas, and that's him. So I get that. At number 7, Armand Membu out of Missouri is seen as probably the physically best tackle in this class. He's a right tackle, played 30 games at right tackle in college. If you guys have not studied up on the prospects, some of you probably have, some of you have not. Membu is a guy that I think would fit the Jets short term with Justin Fields being a run-heavy team. I think fits what Aaron Glenn is looking for in terms of his culture being set from Detroit, being a physical, tough football team, grit, all that sort of stuff. But then long-term, you have Fashanu and you have Membu together at left and right. For the long-term, you're set at tackle, right? You'd have one of the best on-paper tackle duos, young tackle duos in football, maybe the best. So that's a very good start to Aaron Glenn's regime. At number 8, Jalen Walker, who personally I would not pick if I was Carolina. Like if I was going to do a Mitch, who would I pick here? I would probably not go with Jalen Walker. I like Jalen Walker, but I feel like he is not, the best edge rusher they could pick. He's a tweener, and that somewhat concerns me a little bit. That being said, I feel like the Panthers did get a lot out of somebody like Frankie Louvu, who's a fundamental piece to their defense a couple of years ago, right? And also, he could play the edge, he could play linebacker. They do need both positions to a degree, but I would rather take the more explosive, refined, dominant edge rusher. And I think that is Mike Green, personally. But that's just my opinion, okay? So you guys can disagree if you want. Jalen Walker's getting buzz to be a top 5 pick, which I think is wild. But that's just my opinion. At number 9, Shedeur Sanders to the Saints. This is also my projection as of right now. I just recently released a quarterback prediction video for the draft, and that was my landing spot. This does somewhat make sense for the long term of the Saints. The Saints have Derek Carr right now, and with Derek Carr as their quarterback, they're probably going to land somewhere around the 6th to 12th pick next year, in my opinion. It wouldn't shock me if they were, in that range at all. I think they'll be not a good team, but not so bad that they'll have a top quarterback selection. On top of that, I think they want a guy long-term that can inspire the franchise, turn it around, and just sweeten the Saints up. Like, it feels like they've become incredibly lethargic, boring, just not relevant. And I think Shedeur Sanders makes them incredibly relevant, fun, interesting. As much as I'm not a fan of the player, I don't think he is a top 3 quarterback in the class. I actually don't, but that's just, again, my opinion. Many NFL people do see him as the second best quarterback, and that is the consensus, and he is accurate. He would fit a Kellen Moore offense in terms of the quick game, in my opinion. He needs to work on, I think, the mental recognition areas of the game. He's also physically not that special, which is why I'd be hesitant to pick him this high. But I could see where that leadership would come in. I feel like they have not had a guy since Drew Brees. They have not had a serious direction since Sean Payton. And Shedeur would at least give them that start, right? And they could transition to him, have him sit for a year. It makes sense. Now, they do need a corner, but is there a corner that justifies this pick? They could use an offensive lineman, but at this point, is there an offensive lineman that justifies this pick? So it's not like they would be going totally off the board, considering that long-term, Derek Carr is not their quarterback. That's pretty clear. At number 10, Tyler Warren to the Bears. That is a slightly shocking one. I just read that off very casually, but that is slightly surprising because typically, that's not the pick here. Warren, I will say, excellent after the catch guy, vicious, brings just an edge to a team. And if that's what the Bears are looking for, and another pass catcher for Caleb Williams, I don't mind it. I don't think the Bears really have one position that they need more than any other. I mean, I would argue their biggest need could be a stud running back, right? That's why I would pick Genty if he were available, but he's not. So if you view Warren as a top 5, top 7 prospect in that area of this draft, I think some don't even see him as the best tight end. Some do. Most do, I would say. But, they don't need offensive line the way that people think. They don't need tackle the way people think. Maybe they could use a defensive end here. But, I don't think it's crazy to just pick the best player, like another playmaker for your quarterback. So I totally get that. At number 11, Will Johnson to the 49ers, which I would say no, because I don't think the Niners covet corners at this degree. I also would say no, because I think they're going to go defensive line in the first round. I would be genuinely surprised. I think the only way they do not go defensive line in the first round is if they pick Will Campbell because he's still there. But I think that's highly doubtful. I think they're going to go defensive line. I mean, their defensive tackle position is desperate, and their defensive end position, Yetur Gross-Matos is a starter on their depth chart right now opposite Nick Bosa. And this is a team led by Robert Saleh defensively that's been to Super Bowls because of their strength of their defensive line. The defense has always been at its best with a strong and deep defensive line. And that's the scheme they run. It's not corner, right? Yes, Charvarius Ward left, but they have Green, who's really good, okay? And Lenore, who's really good. Those two guys are really good. So sure, their third corner might lack a little bit, but they could find a corner in the second or third round, and they could also sign one still. They still have plenty of cap, believe it or not. To me, Will Johnson, he fits the system. He's big, he's long, he's tall. If he could end up to be the Sauce Gardner, maybe, But to me, like, I'd rather spend it on an edge rusher or a defensive tackle at this position for the Niners. That's just me. At number 12, Hampton to the Cowboys. This makes sense. Hampton is increasingly seen as a top 20 prospect or a top 20 landing spot in this draft in terms of a player that's going to get picked in the top 20. And a very good player. I mean, it's a lot like Bijan and Jahmyr Gibbs at this point, where these two guys are seen very highly. And I don't know, I think most people have Genty a significant distance away, but I don't think it's like that crazy. I would say that the Cowboys need a running back big time. And the justification for this pick, despite some needs that they do have, wide receiver, defensive tackle, maybe linebacker, offensive line. I mean, the Cowboys do need a few different things. The justification for this pick is that the Cowboys have always been the best as a franchise when they've had a stud running back. That's the justification, right? Tony Dorsett, Emmitt Smith, right? Herschel Walker, Zeke, the 1 year of DeMarco Murray, right? Like, when they have a great running back, they are at their best. And Jerry Jones knows that. At number 13, Barron, I don't think is likely for the Dolphins, despite not having a great secondary. Their nickel corner is decent, in my opinion. I think they're looking more for an outside guy. Now, it depends if you believe Barron is a nickel or an outside or a both. They also do desperately need safety. They did draft Patrick Paul at left tackle, and he was a second-round pick last year, so they're looking to develop him and maybe make him their guy. But I still think they need offensive line, or maybe even defensive line. Like, they could use an interior defensive lineman as well. But I think offensive line, especially with the loss of Armstead, it needs to be an exclamation point next to it. Like, it needs to be the first pick. It needs to be. Guard, tackle, doesn't matter. They need to spend resources there to help protect Tua. I mean, he is the most frequently injured an unknown product of a quarterback because of his injury history. So you've spent so much money into him. You need to protect him. And you need to get that power in the run game going as well. So offensive line, I don't think anything else makes sense for Miami at 13. At number 14, Colston Loveland. I think he could go pretty high. I mean, a lot of people, the way they're talking about him is, some people see him better than Warren. I think there's an argument because he's a smoother, craftier, shiftier receiver. And on top of that, you could argue he is a better inline blocker. And those are the two primary skills a tight end can have. So, when I'm ranking prospects, I might even have him above Warren. It's going to be close at the end of the day when I'm truly doing that. But so he could be a top 20 guy. I also think he is more closer to in line to what like Dallas Goedert is, if you're thinking about Steichen, right? So to me, the Colts definitely need a tight end. I think offensive line is a low-key need, and I wouldn't be surprised by linebacker either. So I'll throw those out there. At number 15, Mike Green to the Falcons would be an absolute steal. 17 sacks last year. I think in terms of a bag of pass rush moves, this guy has the best bag. In football, the Falcons have not had a great pass rush in years. They have had very few individuals that have been able to rush off the edge and just create pressure single-handedly. It's a problem. It's a big problem for them, especially if they're going to shift to more of a front four type of system under their new defensive coordinator from the Jets. That is more of a system that covets defensive linemen rather than secondary, which is another option for them in this first round. Number 16, Arizona takes Matthew Golden, wide receiver out of Texas. I recently did a video on the Cardinals. Appreciate everybody that's been commenting and watching and liking that video. Shout out to Cards fans. To me, this pick is low-key interesting because I did mention in that video that the Cardinals need speed at wide receiver. And this guy is very fast, 4.29 speed. At the 40, he can stretch the field. He can open things up for McBride and Harrison and maybe allow you to move around Harrison a little bit more. They do need a number 2 receiver, but they also need corner. They also need linebacker. They could also use youth at edge or defensive tackle. So I'm not sure it's the pick for them just because I think you could get players that are similar later, and I don't think they need to spend such a high capital pick on that, but I understand it. At number 17, Jihad Campbell to the Bengals. Personally, I think Campbell's very good. Some people are kind of all over the place with him. Some people see him as a back half of the draft or back half of the first round, not the draft. And some people see him as like their favorite player on defense in the draft. So he's kind of got a wide range. But I will say that I don't think the Bengals need linebacker as much as other people think, because I think Logan Wilson is a good football player. He was injured last year. Jermaine Pratt is solid. And they did sign Oren Burks. So I kind of don't think that's where they're going to go. I don't think they're going to go defensive tackle because they signed TJ Slayton. I think they're very likely to address edge or corner, maybe even safety. So because edge, I mean, you really look at it, it's Osai and it's Miles Murphy. So they would have to double down on first round picks within the last 3 years at that position, right? 2 of the last 3. And then you're also looking at corner. They could use a number 1 corner long term. And then safety. Their safeties are fine, I think, Battle and Stone, but they don't have a difference-making athlete back there. They're both pedestrian athletes. So 17, Campbell, don't get me wrong, he would help them. I just feel like they could use other positions, more impactful spots. Number 18, Kelvin Banks to Seattle would make sense. I would actually like this pick for them because he has that inside-outside versatility. He could play guard or tackle. So on a line that's so bad, I think that would help. He's also very athletic, and I feel like he would be great in a zone rushing scheme, which is what Kubiak is obviously going to run. Tampa Bay, going with a safety here. Emanwuri out of South Carolina, the freak athlete. He says here 4.38 40-yard dash, ridiculous 43 inches in the vertical, 6'3", 220 is incredible. Now, this is an interesting pick because Todd Bowles is defensive back in nature. He used to play safety in the NFL. That is his position that he likes to maybe spend. What I've noticed from the Bucs is they don't usually spend high capital picks on this position. They don't usually spend high picks on safety or corner because Todd Bowles' expertise are those positions. So I would be slightly surprised. I would be more like if I had to predict it, it would be that the Bucs would take a safety in the second. And I think they're more likely to take a linebacker in the first. That being said, Campbell's already gone in this mock, so I understand. I also think they could just throw more resources at the front, whether, probably edge position, because Hassan Reddick was a signing for them, but I mean, you could always use more edge rush, and Reddick is not a certainty. That being said, hey, maybe Todd Bowles changes his mind. Maybe Jason Light wants to give him a real piece to work with, and partnering him up with Antoine Winfield would be a lot of fun. Antoine Winfield was their highest pick at those positions, right? Carlton Davis was a second-round pick, I think. Jamel Dean was not a high pick. Like, both those guys ended up working out. McCollum was not a high pick. He was a later pick, right? These guys that have worked out for them, they're not high picks. So I'm just going to throw that out there. But, yeah, I mean, it would be pretty interesting. It's definitely a position of need. Number 20, T-Mac falling all the way to 20 to Denver would be crazy. I see a lot of overlap here with Sutton and McMillan. That being said, Sutton is getting older. They're both ex-receivers by nature. I think McMillan could play a lot in the slot, though, early in his career, because he did do that at Arizona. And, I mean, that would be crazy. I mean, 2 guys that are big, physical, can make crazy contested catches for Bo Nix. Bo Nix was really getting increasingly better at throwing the ball deep last year. So that would make their deep ball game pretty interesting, on top of all the screen stuff they can do within the offense. So I'd definitely not blast this pick whatsoever. I think it's a big need. That and running back makes the most sense for Denver. At number 21, Derek Harmon. I think he should be going higher in the draft, personally, just based on his pressure numbers, his interior pass rush ability. I think it's something that is, big-time stuff. The Steelers here would be getting a guy to replace Cam Hayward long-term. Some people think they could go quarterback here, whether they have Aaron Rodgers or not, including myself. That's possible. I feel like they could go really offensive line wouldn't surprise me either. Running back wouldn't surprise me either. But Derek Harmon, that would be a good pick. Number 22, Gray Zabel to the Chargers. I don't see it personally because I think they've already addressed the interior with both Andre James and they signed Mekhi Becton. So I don't think that they would go guard center. The overlap there just would not make sense. Zion Johnson was also a first-round pick not that long ago. So I feel like they would not go here. I think they have too many other holes, whether it's wide receiver, whether it's maybe even tight end or corner, defensive tackle. Those are all positions that I think they would rather have. Number 23, Michael Williams is a perfect Packer in my opinion. He's got the length and the size. They like Georgia players. That's all frequent with them. They have a type. I think that would be a good pick too, like in terms of he could play across the defensive line. He's very strong, very powerful. He doesn't exactly have to play right now, but they can mold him a little bit, but he can play in the rotation, and they do need defensive ends. So I would understand that pick. Number 24, Minnesota picking Donovan Jackson. Yes, they do need a guard over. I think Brendel or something is their starter, if I'm not mistaken. They could definitely upgrade that spot. That's low key a need, and they've spent a lot of capital on the offensive line. So maybe they double down there to protect JJ. I could get that one. I also feel like corner or safety could also be a pick in the first round for the Vikings. Otherwise, I mean, they don't have a lot of needs. 25, Josh Connerly Jr. Yes. Offensive line, and Connerly I think will go in the first round based on the study of him as well as the way that certain smart people talk about him. I think he is a first round pick technique wise, but he was kind of being steamed out of the first round for some reason. He was dropping. I think he's I think because of so many of these teams in the back half of the round need offensive line. So I think he's likely to land in that spot. Texans should certainly go offensive line. There's almost no other position that they should pick. Within even the first 3 rounds, they should be picking an offensive lineman in every single round, guys. Number 26, Jackson Dart, quarterback out of Ole Miss to the Rams. That to me is wild because Matthew Stafford is not going anywhere anytime soon. He is 37, but he was extended. So he's probably going to play until he's 40, 2 to 3 years, right? And the Rams are going to try to maximize that window, which means they spend first-round picks on players that can help them, you would think. Not pedestrian, mediocre, athletic Jackson Dart, who you could probably find in another draft in the next 2 years. So to me, I just don't see it. I think that they'll go with a player to help their defense at linebacker or the third level of the secondary, maybe even an offensive lineman. I think the Rams are not going to address future quarterback this highly because I think they can win another Super Bowl with Matthew Stafford. So why not go for the player that can help you now? At number 27, Malachi Starks out of Georgia to the Ravens. We've talked about how they could probably pick a versatile defensive back, somebody to help them out in the secondary. I would prefer they go with an edge rusher, but I understand this pick. This is one of their bigger needs. They don't have a lot of needs. Look out for guard or offensive line in general as well. Number 28, Ezaraku out of Boston College, who I think is kind of underrated. Very good pass rusher. Very good bend. I'm not sure he's their type based on what the Lions have coveted in the past, which is length, power, and size. I think he is a little bit smaller than their typical, so I would just say that. But he would really help their pass rush, and he'd be a perfect 2 to Aiden Hutchinson. Shamar Stewart dropping to 29. I don't think he'll go this low just because he's such a freak athlete, even if you don't think he's been productive enough. I just think these type of athletes go in the top 20. So I don't think he'll last this long, but it would make sense for the Commanders to go with edge. I think it's their biggest need. Stewart, though, is a little bit bigger than the typical guy that the Commanders would look for, right? They had Dante Fowler. That's who they're looking to replace. And it would actually make sense to switch these 2 picks. I think Ezaraku and Stewart make more sense that way. Number 30, Hairston to the Bills. Fast. Again, don't think he's their type, but they could use speed on the back end of their defense, especially when having to cover Zay Flowers and Xavier Worthy. So that would be an interesting, matchup type of pick for the Bills. And I do think corner is their biggest need because they lost Rasul Douglas. At least so far they have. 31, Josh Simmons. This seems to be very consistent for the Chiefs. They, long-term tackle option that could be a stud, but it's a little bit of a risky pick. But they did sign Jalen Moore. If Jalen Moore does not work out, Simmons could slide into left. Also, Simmons probably won't play much this year if that's the case, if he goes to Kansas City. But Jawan Taylor also is not a lock long-term for this team. So tackle could be a big need in the first round. James Pierce would be the steal for the Eagles. He's a really good pass rusher with quickness and, kind of has that same sort of Nolan Smith type of vibe. Josh Sweat left in free agency, who apparently, according to some Cardinals fans, is slightly above average, which is not true. Shout out to that guy. But Pierce, very productive. I think he would fit right in their rotation. They love defensive line, offensive line in the first round. Don't be surprised by a tackle either if there's one there that they like, but defensive end would make sense. I also think safety would make a lot of sense. Second round, first pick of the second round, Tyler Shuck to the Browns. I like this fit personally because I think Shuck is not that, Shuck is NFL ready. He's older, but he's not that experienced, but his game is nuanced and his game is mature, I would say. He also could start this year for the Browns, and you could kind of basically tell us, okay, do they have a guy for the future or not? And then we could decide. And it's only a second round pick, so it's not like it's a swing, but it's not a swing that is so big. Like it's not going with Shador in the second round or the first round, sorry, at the second pick. I meant, it's going with a second round pick, roll the dice. Guy has talent, big arm, good deep ball, athletic. I think he'd be a good fit. I think he'd be better than Kenny Pickett day one. 34, Jalen Milroe. This is actually my prediction for the Giants and actually both these teams, which is why it feels so familiar. But Jalen Milroe to the Giants. I love the fit for Milroe because he'd be the third quarterback on the depth chart in year one, and he could be their long-term guy. And he could learn under Jameis and Russ, two good mentor quarterbacks for him. Milroe, I think, is a good kid. I think that he's going to work hard to work on his technique, work on his release, work on his delivery, all that sort of stuff. And he has rare ability as a rusher, freak athlete. Like he's a guy that I would be willing to take a little bit of a roll of the dice on. At number 35, Oladeo out of UCLA, the pass rusher. The Titans did lose Harold Landry, as he discussed here. And yes, they do need a pass rusher, right? And that's a good way to start a draft. Future quarterback, future pass rusher. Makes a lot of sense. I would give it a thumbs up. I haven't seen his name too frequently in this range. Maybe one or two times, but not too frequently. But yeah, I mean, that would make sense. They do need an edge rush. I mean, their edge rusher position is bad. Draymond Jones right now and Arden Key are their starting edge rushers. Jacksonville, Emeka Abuka, wide receiver. That would make sense. I think wide receiver is a low-key need, but I do think safety is a bigger need, and I do think corner is a need as well, potentially. Maybe even offensive line, but wide receiver, too, is a need. And Emeka Abuka is the wide receiver, too, of college football the last couple of years. Brian Thomas could stretch the field, be the explosive, the number one for Lawrence. And Abuka could be like the Chris Godwin type of slot guy for Liam Cohen. Number 37, Carson Schwessinger out of UCLA. Linebacker, another UCLA name. He's mostly seen by mock drafts as the second best linebacker, if I'm not mistaken. And the Raiders could use linebacker for sure. They signed Devin White. They signed Landon Roberts. Again, guys, though, I think corner, they haven't addressed corner yet. Corner is a big need. They just released Jack Jones. I mean, they don't have any corners, guys. They lost Nate Hobbs. They need corner more than linebacker. I think they can get by with what they currently have on their roster at linebacker, while corner is desperation mode. So maybe that linebacker is still a need, though. I'm not going to deny that, especially with the Landon Roberts' age and Devin White's inconsistency. At number 38, Luther Burden to the Patriots. This would be an exciting pick. I don't know about this pick, though, because he's mostly seen as a slot receiver, and he's a yak guy, which I'd like, but they do need playmakers. I just feel like we need an X receiver, personally, and there's not a lot of them. I just don't know if he's too particular. He is very explosive. New England needs explosion. This is one I'll have to think about. But yes, I would not poo-poo a wide receiver pick to the Patriots in the second round. That feels, especially if Will Campbell is the first pick, wide receiver feels like the most likely second pick. I wouldn't be surprised by an edge either if there's one that falls to this spot. I wouldn't be surprised by that either. Or even a running back, honestly. But I feel like Luther Burden, okay, wide receiver, the next wide receiver probably on Mel's board. I'm fine with it. Chicago, Walter Nolan feels like a guy that I've seen go, in the top 20, and now he's all the way down at 39. I think he's a first-round pick. I think he's strong, powerful, disruptive. He could really help the Bears, that's for sure. That's like a David Onyemata type player for Dennis Allen, right? So that would make a lot of sense. They could use a defensive tackle. I mean, Grady Jarrett and Andrew Billings, and they've got Dexter, right? No stud there. I do think edge is probably a bigger need, though. But, hey, just taking the best defensive lineman makes a lot of sense. At number 40, Azarie Thomas, I believe is how you say his first name, Azarie, out of Florida State. Good length and speed. Yes, they need a corner. That's what I said in the first round. They could use a corner. But this would be perfect for the Saints. Get Shador, future prospect for quarterback to replace Derek Carr long term, give you some hope, some inspiration. And Thomas could fulfill the Paulson Adebo, the Marshawn Lattimore that you've lost within the last year of the NFL calendar. And their corner position is bad. Trayvon Henderson, love this kid. That would be a good pick for the Bears. Explosive, off the charts explosive. I feel like he's, top 3 or 4 running back in the class. So I definitely like this pick. The Bears' biggest need, in my opinion, is a difference-making running back. I don't believe that to be DeAndre Swift. Arroyo out of Miami to the Jets. He is seen as the third best tight end by many. He often gets mocked in this range. I feel like the Jets, if they don't go Warren at 7, they're going to probably pick a tight end in the second or the third round. So it is very likely. It makes a lot of sense that they would partner up Membu with a tight end, and that also makes more sense from a positional value standpoint. You want to take the tackle early and the tight end a little bit later. So I get that one. Number 43, Kenneth Grant to the Niners. This would be, I think, a great pick for them. It would give them a big, solid nose tackle. I would probably prefer, obviously they miss out on Walter Nolan. Nolan would be ideal, but I feel like, Grant would still be a good pick. Could immediately contribute, immediately start, immediately help a run defense that has been falling off a cliff. I would say, though, the Niners have a chance. Like, in this mock draft, they could have had Mike Green and Kenneth Grant. Just throwing that out there. Number 44, Trey Amos, corner out of Ole Miss. They could move Bland to the nickel spot, but I feel like they have other areas of need that are more significant than corner. But yeah, I would prefer them to work interior D-line, work offensive line, wide receiver, right? They went running back in the first round, so. But if they want to move Bland to the nickel, okay. Maybe even Amos could play the nickel. I guess that's what he's saying here. Okay. Savania, I believe is how you pronounce his name. A guard out of Arizona. Okay, yes, I think the Colts will take a guard pretty high in the draft. I mentioned it in the first round. Guard makes a lot of sense. They lost Will Fries, and they also lost Ryan Kelly. So their interior offensive line is weaker than years past. It's a bigger need than years past, and the Colts have not been afraid to address the offensive line. This makes sense. Also, the style of player, physicality, right? Run game ability, that makes sense. Benjamin Morrison to the Falcons. He's got the length that I feel like that jet scheme, also Raheem Morris would look for. Could be a number 2 opposite A.J. Terrell. So you get your pass rusher round 1, your corner round 2. I like it. I also think that's how they would organize what they're looking for need-wise. Number 47, Tyler Booker lasts all the way to the middle of the second. This would be a perfect pick for the Cardinals, who some people think is going to go in the first round to the Cardinals. So this would be a great value and help them in the run game for sure. Guard is a low-key need, especially right guard. Darius Alexander, D-tackle out of Toledo to the Dolphins. Yes, I mentioned D-tackle as a big need for them. Offensive line being first and foremost. But here's the thing. You didn't take an offensive lineman in the first round there, Mel. You took a D-tackle and you took a corner, bro. So offensive line is becoming desperate for Miami. I don't care who they have on the defensive line. If they can't block, they're going to struggle. Then we got Tui Maloa out of Ohio State to the Bengals. He could be their edge 2, or at least in combination with Myles Murphy and Osai. Okay. We'll see if Hendrickson stays or goes. I think he'll stay for a year or two. I'm hoping he stays for the rest of his career because I want to see the Bengals compete for championships with Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase because they're one of the most exciting teams in football. But yes, defensive end is a big need for them, and they went with linebacker in the first. So going with front 7 back-to-back. I like it. Guard is also a need for them. Number 50, Revel Jr. out of East Carolina. Yes, they need a corner, a number 2 corner on the opposite side of Reek Woolen, and Devin Witherspoon plays the nickel. That being said, offensive line for Seattle. They went offensive line in the first round, right? Yes. I still think they could use more offensive line. But yes, corner, I could see them going the first 3 rounds. That makes a lot of sense to me. Number 53, Scourton out of Texas A&M. Defensive end. Okay, yeah, I mentioned defensive end, edge rusher in the first round for them. He is more of a bull rush guy, more of a power guy. That's typically what the Bucs look for at this edge position. They're not as much into the bendy guys as they are into the straight up power rushers to set the edge and be strong in the running game. So that makes sense. I will say corner is also a need. They picked up a safety in the first round. Linebacker is a need too. Number 54, Jack Besh, TCU, wide receiver, another mid-round receiver for the Packers. Is he special enough, though, to really make a difference for the Packers? They need a number 1 guy, right? They need a number 1 guy. Don't know if he's that, but he's another guy to add to the long list of receivers in Green Bay. I would rather than pick a corner there. Number 55, Mason Taylor, tight end out of LSU. Okay. Yeah, they need a tight end. They need a pass catcher. Again, probably rather have a receiver because they do have Tyler Conklin and Will Dissly. But again, Greg Roman, Jim Harbaugh, they love their tight ends. 56, Williams, defensive tackle for Buffalo. Bills fans still believe they need defensive tackle to help them against the run. This is a very deep and strong defensive tackle class, so it makes sense. I can't really knock it. I do think they need a safety, though. Number 57, Isaiah Bond, wide receiver out of Texas. Feels like a little bit of a reach. And again, is Isaiah Bond the type of player that is going to replace or be more impactful than Adam Thielen, Leggett, or Coker? I'm not sure. I think I'd be better off picking one of the strong defensive linemen in this deep class than a wide receiver that's probably not a number 1, because that's what the Panthers need. They don't need a number 3. Jalen Knoll, wide receiver out of Iowa State to the Texans. Give me an offensive lineman. Knoll is interesting, though. Fast. I think he can play outside. So, okay. I get it. The Texans. But that being said, Kirk's on a 1-year deal. Tank Dell long-term. They have their number 1, one of the best receivers in football in Nico Collins. So maybe he's their number 3 next year. If Tank Dell comes back all good, he's their number 3 this year because Kirk's there. I'd rather them establish the offensive line and go back-to-back. Number 59, David Walker. That's what I'm looking for. Edge rusher for the Ravens. That's their biggest need, in my opinion. They've got Van Noy and Owe, but I feel like they need more. They need help pass rushing-wise. 31 sacks. It's pretty impressive over the last 3 years. Anthony Belton, guard tackle to the Lions. Yes, they need offensive line interior, especially, and he could play replacing Kevin Zeitler. So I agree with that. I like the first 2 picks for the Lions. Makes a lot of sense. Defensive end and guard. 61, Darian Porter, corner to Washington. I think they need a safety more than the corner because they brought in Jonathan Jones. So I would probably rather them go with a safety, but I understand corner, especially with Marshawn Lattimore's injury history, but they're banking on him quite a bit. Number 62, Watts would be a steal to the Bills. Again, Bills have 2 second-round picks, which I keep forgetting when I was talking about the Bills earlier. This would be a beautiful first round for them, getting a big man for their defensive line and getting a safety that could contribute. And then also getting a first-round corner, right? So that's their 3 top needs. That would be a money draft for them, regardless of what you think of the prospects. Running back for the Chiefs doesn't make any sense. I'm sorry. I think that would be a waste of a pick. Caleb Johnson's interesting. I like him. Good size, build, power, and speed. But I don't see how that moves the dial. I think they need a guard. I think they need defensive end, defensive tackle, way more than they need running back. They brought back Kareem Hunt. They have Elijah Mitchell as well. They have Isaiah Pacheco. I don't know about that. Number 64, Kevin Winston, safety out of Penn State. Yeah, we mentioned the Eagles, especially if they pick up a gem like Pierce late in the first round, very likely to go secondary at number 64. So that makes a lot of sense. There it is, guys. My thoughts on Mel Kiper Jr.'s 4.0 NFL mock draft. Let me know in the comments what you thought about my reactions, his mock draft, what you agreed with, what you disagreed with. Gronk spiked the like button. I'll be coming out with more mock drafts very, very soon. More NFL draft content in general coming soon. So subscribe, jabroni. Peace.